In this video, we're going to take a look at the developments that took place in Season 7, Episode 8 of The Curse of Oak Island. After the plot summary and analysis, I'm going to include a little documentary I put together on the classical French Baroque painter Nicolas Poussin, his painting The Shepherds of Arcadia, and the mysteries which revolve around him and his work. Season 7, Episode 8 of The Curse of Oak Island begins at Smith's Cove, where the mysterious tar-papered wooden wall and possible remains of the Smith's Cove flood tunnel were discovered at the end of the previous episode. Rick Lagina eventually suggests that the structure might be the work of Robert and Bobby Restall, as it bears some resemblance to other structures the Restalls are known to have built, but puzzles over how the Restalls could have built it, as the ground on which it was constructed would have been underwater during the days of the Restall treasure hunt. The treasure hunters proceed to excavate the area surrounding the structure and expose 4 more log walls, which appear to form twin shafts or boxes. At a depth of about 3 feet below the lip of one of the boxes, Doug Crowell discovers a platform of wooden beams. In the earth beside the structure, Gary Drayton comes across an iron object which bears great resemblance to the crib spikes discovered near the Smith's Cove slipway back in Season 6, Episode 16. Despite these interesting developments, the crew decides to temporarily discontinue their investigation of the structure and excavate more of the surrounding area first, fearful that a rigorous investigation of the box-like structure might necessitate their digging a wider hole, which might prevent them from accessing other areas of the bump-out with heavy equipment. In the middle of the episode, the crew meets in the war room with researcher Corian Moll, who presents his own Oak Island theory involving the classical French Baroque painter Nicolas Poussin and his 2 paintings entitled Et in Arcadia Ego, also known as The Shepherds of Arcadia. Both of Poussin's paintings depict shepherds in a wilderness setting, examining an overgrown tomb inscribed with the words Et in Arcadia Ego, a Latin phrase which translates to Even in Arcadia I. Moll suggests that the tomb's inscription might be an anagram for Gite Neo Arcadia, which in Italian means excursion to New Arcadia. Moll further suggests that this anagram implies the importance of some sort of voyage to New Arcadia, or the Canadian Maritimes. In classical Greek mythology, Arcadia is a pastoral paradise situated in the sparsely populated mountainous interior of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. Named after Arcas, a legendary Greek demigod and hunter, the Arcadia of Greek mythology was said to be home to shepherds and nymphs who lived in harmony with nature, ruled over by the god Pan. In this episode, the narrator explains that the Italian explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano explored North America's Atlantic coast from North Carolina to Nova Scotia on behalf of King Francis I of France from 1523 to 24. During the voyage, Verrazzano named the beautiful forested coastline north of Virginia Arcadia, after the legendary pastoral paradise of ancient Greek mythology. According to Canadian bibliographer William F. E. Morley in his 1979 article on Verrazzano for the Dictionary of Canadian Biography, the word Arcadia, in its North American context, made its first cartographical appearance on Italian cartographer Giacomo Gastaldi's 1548 map of North America's Atlantic coast. King Henry IV of France, who would become a great supporter and sponsor of Samuel de Champlain, the so-called Father of Acadia, referred to the Canadian Maritimes as l'Acadie in a 1603 colonial license for French explorer Pierre Dugas, Sieur de Mont. Many historians believe that l'Acadie has its origins in a native word picked up by French explorers, citing similar native place names like Shubenacadie and Tracadie as evidence. Samuel de Champlain apparently married Verrazzano's Arcadia with King Henry's l'Acadie by naming the Canadian Maritimes l'Acadie, or Acadia, in his writings and maps. Back in the war room, Corian Moll shows the treasure hunters another painting by Nicolas Poussin entitled Midas Washing at the Source of the Pactolus. This painting, Moll informs the treasure hunters, was made just after the Shepherds of Arcadia and was intended to form a pendant painting with it. In other words, both paintings were meant to hang side by side. This claim is supported by the posthumous inventory of Cardinal Camillo Massimo, a 17th century Roman church official and a major patron of the arts who owned both paintings, which referred to the items as due quadri compagni, or 2 fellow paintings. The painting Midas Washing at the Source of the Pactolus depicts a scene in the classical Greek legend of King Midas of Phrygia. According to the legend, a satyr, or woodland deity, granted Midas's wish for the ability to turn everything he touched into gold. Unable to eat or drink as a result of his new power, Midas prayed to the Greek god Dionysus, called Bacchus by the Romans, to reverse the satyr's work. A sympathetic Dionysus ordered Midas to bathe in the Pactolus River. In doing so, the Phrygian king cleansed himself of his affliction, depositing gold dust into the riverbed in the process. Moll puts forth the theory that Poussin's painting, which depicts Midas bathing in the Pactolus River, is a reference to Nova Scotia's Gold River, a gold-bearing waterway which empties into Mahone Bay just northwest of Oak Island. Corey Moll further argues that Nicolas Poussin's second rendition of the Arcadian Shepherds, painted around 1637-38, was modelled on a portion of a pentagram. He goes on to suggest that the painting and the pentagram on which it is modelled, when superimposed over top of Nolan's cross, forms a treasure map indicating an area of interest near the tip of the Oak Island swamp. Moll finishes his presentation by suggesting that the Knights Templar buried the Ark of the Covenant on Oak Island, and that Nicolas Poussin somehow became privy to their secret. Corey and Moll's theory appears to be an extension of another larger theory, which I will explain at the end of the video. Following Moll's presentation, Rick Lagina, Steve Guptill, and Tony Sampson assist GPR experts Don Johnston and Steve Watson in a GPR scan of the Oak Island swamp. Using a dinghy and a rope laid along grid lines which Guptill prescribed, the crew floats Johnston and Watson's GPR scanner across the swamp. During the process, Johnston and Watson detect a 6-meter-wide anomaly located 3 meters below the surface. This is not the first time a ground-penetrating radar scan has been conducted in the Oak Island swamp. Back in Season 2, Episode 8, Pat Campbell and Matt Savell of Canadian Seabed Research Limited scanned the swamp's southeast corner, the Mercy Point, and the so-called Enochian Chamber area on the swamp's western edge with a GPR device. Although the scans indicated the presence of several underground anomalies, further investigation yielded little of interest. Near the end of this episode, the crew conducts an exploratory drilling operation in search of more walls from Shaft 2, a 114-foot deep searcher shaft built by the Onslow Company in 1805, which the crew may have intersected at the end of the previous episode. The treasure hunters examine a core sample taken from a depth of 19 to 29 feet and discover a large piece of timber, perhaps a corner piece of the shaft, at a depth of 24 to 29 feet. The choice drilling crew proceeds to sink another hole at another suspected location of a Shaft 2 wall, and finds wood at a depth of 98.5 to 103.5 feet. Says Doug Kroll of the Discovery, quote, "We've got 3 points now that can't just be one wall. So we've got 2 walls." Unquote. The crew then agrees to sink another hole in the hope of intersecting the 14-foot-long tunnel which once connected Shaft 2 with the original money pit, and to submit the recently discovered wood samples for dendrochronological dating. At the end of the episode, the crew meets in the war room to hear the results of the dendrochronological testing. Craig Tester, who is in attendance via Skype, reveals that dendrochronologist Dr. Colin LaRoque, who dated the wood from several Smith's Cove structures back in Season 6, Episode 21, dated the 98.5 to 103.5 foot deep wood from the suspected Shaft 2 wall to 1796. Tester reminds the crew that Shaft 2 is believed to have been constructed in 1805, and remarks that LaRoque's dating fits perfectly with this. The narrator then remarks that, since it appears the crew has determined the location and orientation of Shaft 2, they finally know the precise location of the original money pit. In this episode, researcher Corey Moll presented his own Oak Island theory, which involves the 17th century French painter Nicolas Poussin and his 2 paintings entitled Et in Arcadia Ego, or The Shepherds of Arcadia. Moll is not the first researcher to include Poussin in his personal Oak Island theory. In fact, the French painter appears so frequently in various Oak Island theories, as well as in hypotheses regarding other potentially related mysteries, that a brief biography of the artist and an explanation of his place in some of the more popular of these theses may prove interesting to some viewers. Nicolas Poussin was born in Normandy, France in 1594. Early on, Poussin displayed a natural aptitude for and interest in painting. Contrary to his parents' wishes, he moved to Paris at the age of 18, where he pursued a career as an artist. Poussin apprenticed with a variety of established Parisian painters and, in his early 20s, began receiving his own commissions from churches and convents. In 1622, the Society of Jesus, also known as the Jesuit Order, hired Poussin to create 6 watercolor paintings depicting the miracles of St. Ignatius of Loyola and St. Francis Xavier, the Order's founders, both of whom had just been canonized by the Catholic Church. These paintings were seen and admired by Giambattista Marino, a Napolitano poet. At that time, Marino served as court poet to Marie de' Medici, the mother and former regent of the reigning King Louis XIII. In the context of Oak Island, it might be worth noting that, although Marie de' Medici appeared to have little interest in the exploration of the Americas, her late husband, King Henry IV of France, had used the money she had inherited from her wealthy Florentine family to finance the voyages of explorer Samuel de Champlain, the so-called father of Acadia and New France. Impressed by Poussin's paintings, Marino commissioned the young French artist with making 15 drawings, 11 of them depicting scenes from the Roman poet Ovid's masterwork, Metamorphoses, and 4 of them depicting historic Roman battles. It seems likely that Poussin, who had received little formal education in his youth, first learned the story of King Midas during this period, as this legend features in Book 11 of Metamorphoses. Recall that the story of Midas is a subject of Poussin's Midas washing at the source of the Pactolus, which formed a pendant painting with his first rendition of the Shepherds of Arcadia. In 1623, Marino moved to Rome and invited Poussin to join him there. Poussin agreed to do so upon his completion of several major commissions for the residence of Marie de' Medici and the family chapel of the Archbishop of Paris in the Cathedral of Notre Dame. In 1624, Nicolas Poussin relocated to Rome, where he would spend most of his professional life. For nearly 4 decades, the French artist painted hundreds of pieces for Roman cardinals and Italian aristocrats in his own unique classical French Baroque style. In 1627, he painted his first rendition of Et in Arcadia Ego, which appears to be based on another painting of the same name by Italian Baroque artist Giovanni Barbieri, more popularly known as Il Guercino. Il Guercino's Et in Arcadia Ego, painted between 1618 and 1622, depicts 2 shepherds in a rural setting staring at a skull resting on a cippus, a Roman milestone sometimes used as a funeral memorial. The bricks of the cippus are inscribed with the words Et in Arcadia Ego, or Even in Arcadia I. As mentioned earlier, Arcadia is the name for the mountainous interior of the Peloponnesian Peninsula, which classical Greek mythology contends was a paradise populated by shepherds and nymphs. The ambiguous Latin phrase inscribed on Il Guercino's cippus appears to serve as a memento mori, a sobering reminder of our own mortality, asserting that death is everywhere, even in the paradise of Arcadia. Nicolas Poussin's 1627 rendition of Et in Arcadia Ego depicts 2 shepherds and a provocatively dressed shepherdess examining an overgrown tomb in the wilderness. Like Il Guercino's cippus, Poussin's tomb is inscribed with the phrase Et in Arcadia Ego. In the foreground of the painting is a reclining man wearing a laurel wreath on his head, whom some art historians have interpreted as Alpheus, a river god of Greek mythology who happens to feature in Ovid's Metamorphoses. It is interesting to note that this figure bears great resemblance to Dionysus in Poussin's 1627 painting Midas washing at the source of the Pactolus, which was meant to serve as a companion to Et in Arcadia Ego. Nearly 10 years later, from 1637 to 38, Poussin painted a second rendition of Et in Arcadia Ego for Cardinal Giulio Rospigliosi, an Italian church leader who would go on to become Pope Clement IX. This painting differs from Poussin's earlier version in several ways, including the more dignified dress and bearing of the shepherdess, and the letter of the inscription at which one of the shepherds is pointing. In the 1627 painting, the shepherd points to the letter D, while in the later painting, a shepherd points to the letter R. Nicolas Poussin's 40-year residency in Rome was punctuated by an illustrious 2-year stint in Paris. In late 1640, the French painter returned to his home country to serve as first painter to King Louis XIII. For 2 years, Poussin created paintings for French churches, religious organizations, and the famous Red Eminence Cardinal Richelieu. Poussin returned to Rome in December 1642, where he spent the rest of his life painting for a number of patrons he had acquired back in France. He passed away in Rome on November 19, 1665. And was buried in Rome's Basilica of San Lorenzo in Lucina. For centuries, an aura of mystery and intrigue has surrounded Nicolas Poussin and his work. This sentiment is epitomized in a cryptic inscription on the artist's tomb, which lies below a sculpted relief depicting Poussin's second version of Et in Arcadia Ego, crafted in 1832. When translated from Latin to English, the inscription reads, "Spare your pious tears, Poussin lives in this urn. He had given his life without knowing how to die. In this place Poussin is silent, but if you would like to hear him speak, it is surprising. He lives and speaks through his paintings." The notion that the great French artist may have been privy to some sort of important secret first appeared in April 17, 1656, in a letter written by Abbé Louis Fouquet, the future bishop of a region in southern France, to his elder brother Nicolas Fouquet, the superintendent of finances at the court of French King Louis XIV. Louis was one of Poussin's patrons and lived in Rome at the time. To his elder brother in Paris, he wrote, in French, "I have delivered to Monsieur Poussin the letter which you have done him the honor of writing to him. He has read it with all imaginable joy. You would not believe, monsieur, either the pains he takes for your service, the affection with which he takes them, or the merit and probity he brings in all things. He and I have planned certain things, of which I shall be able to talk to you in depth, which will give you, by Monsieur Poussin, advantages, if you do not wish to despise them, that kings would have great difficulty in drawing from him, and that after him perhaps no one in the world will ever recover in the centuries to come. And what is more, this could be done without much expense and could even turn to profit. And these things are so hard to discover that no one, no matter who, upon this earth today could have better fortune or perhaps equal." This cryptic letter is doubly intriguing in light of certain events which succeeded it. In the early autumn of 1661, Nicolas Fouquet was arrested by the captain of the King's Musketeers and charged with embezzlement. After an unfair trial which lasted nearly 3 years, Fouquet was convicted and sentenced to imprisonment for life. The former finance minister spent the rest of his days locked away in the fortress of Pignerol, located in what is now the town of Pignerolo, Italy. As he was a man of high birth, Fouquet was assigned a valet or manservant during his incarceration. Interestingly, whenever Fouquet's regular valet was indisposed, he was substituted by the so-called Man in the Iron Mask, a mysterious unidentified prisoner who was otherwise held in solitary confinement and forced at all times to wear a mask of either iron or velvet. 5 years after Nicolas Fouquet's death in 1680, King Louis XIV purchased a number of Nicolas Poussin's paintings, including his second rendition of the Shepherds of Arcadia, and added them to the French royal collection. 10 years later, the Shepherds of Arcadia was displayed in the Palace of Versailles, where it remained until its relocation to the Louvre Museum in 1806. Strangely, the painting is said to have disappeared sometime between its introduction to Versailles and its relocation to Paris. It curiously failed to appear in a 1750 exhibition of the French royal collection in Luxembourg. Around that same time, in the mid-18th century, a wealthy British MP named Thomas Anson, the elder brother of Admiral George Anson of the Royal British Navy, who circumnavigated the globe in the 1740s and who features in George Clayton's Oak Island Theory, which was presented back in Season 4, Episode 13, decorated the yard of Shugborough Hall, his family's ancestral home in Staffordshire, England, with 8 custom-made megalithic monuments. Among the strangest of these is the so-called Shepherd's Monument, a rustic arch in which is set a mirror-image relief copy of Poussin's second rendition of the Shepherds of Arcadia, crafted by Flemish sculptor Peter Schumacher. The monument also contains the carved bald head of a smiling man, a carved head with goat-like horns resembling the god Pan of Greek mythology, the ruler of Arcadia, and 8 Roman letters flanked by a D to the lower left and an M to the lower right. The sequence of letters on the Shepherd's Monument, also known as the Shugborough inscription, appears to form some sort of code. Although many cryptographers have put forth a variety of possible solutions to the code, none of these has been universally accepted. Some researchers believe that the Shugborough Monument is related in some way to the Oak Island mystery. Many of them point to the fact that one of the shepherds in the monument sculpture has his index finger placed on the letter R in Et in Arcadia Ego, almost as if to cover it up. Removing the R from Arcadia makes Acadia, the name for the old French province in the Canadian Maritimes, in which Oak Island is located. When this tantalizing possibility is considered in the context of the rest of the scene, the sculpture appears to imply that something important is entombed in Acadia, or Nova Scotia. One proponent of the theory that the Shugborough monument is connected in some way to the Oak Island mystery is Swedish art director Peter Oberg. Oberg believes that the letters on the Shugborough inscription stand for numbers which, when added up, equal 2,810, the distance in miles from the Shepherd's Monument to Oak Island's money pit. He arrives at these numbers by calculating the diameter of circles drawn on the monument's engraving, and by interpreting some letters as Roman numerals. Another Scandinavian who believes in a connection between the Shugborough inscription and the Oak Island mystery is Norwegian organist and cryptographer Petter Amundsen, who presented his own Oak Island theory back in Season 1, Episode 4. Amundsen believes that the inscription forms a 3-level cipher. On the first level, the letters form some sort of anagram which, when the letters are switched to their Greek forms, appears to suggest the name Thomas Anson, the man who commissioned the Shepherd's Monument. The second cipher level, decoded using a key in a poem, Greek mythology, and astronomy, allegedly creates a celestial map which leads to Oak Island. The third alleged cipher level, first discovered by another Norwegian named Øystein Bruno Larsen, involves turning the inscription letters into geographic coordinates, which lead to a location 1.5 nautical miles from Oak Island. Amundsen presented his theory in the book he co-wrote with Norwegian novelist Erlend Loe, entitled Organisten, or The Organist. When one considers the mystique that Nicolas Poussin and his paintings have garnered over the years as a result of the Shugborough monument and the cryptic inscription that adorns his tomb, it is easy to understand how the French painter and his famous second rendition of the Shepherds of Arcadia found their way into the heart of a clever 20th century hoax upon which an entire genre of misguided Oak Island theories are based. The story of this hoax begins in 1969, when British screenwriter Henry Lincoln picked up a copy of the recently published book Les Trésors Maudits de Rennes-le-Château, or The Accursed Treasure of Rennes-le-Château, by French author Gérard de Sade. The book puts a twist on a little local legend endemic to a sleepy town in southern France called Rennes-le-Château. The original legend on which de Sade based his book was first proliferated in the mid-1950s by a local restaurateur named Noël Corbu, and dealt with a former local character named Father Béranger Saunier. Saunier was a Roman Catholic priest who was appointed to Rennes-le-Château's Church of St. Mary Magdalene in 1885. In the late 1800s, Saunier renovated his dilapidated parish and built a castle-like library and villa for himself, paying for the costly projects with mysteriously acquired money. The regional bishop conducted an investigation into Saunier's mysterious wealth and eventually charged him with simony, the fraudulent sale of religious favors. Specifically, the bishop accused the priest of pressuring people into making donations he did not need and accepting payments for hundreds of masses he never intended to say. In the Catholic Church, it is common for parishioners to ask the priest to offer a mass for a specific intention, like the repose of a recently deceased relative. According to Noël Corbu, however, the source of Saunier's wealth was not simony, but rather the lost treasure of the 13th century French queen Blanche de Castile, who raised ransom money for her son, Prince, and later Saint, Louis IX, after his capture by Egyptian Saracens in the 7th Crusade at the Battle of Al-Mansoura. Saunier located this treasure by following clues laid out in parchments he discovered in a particular pillar in his church during the renovations he financed in the late 1800s. The French author Gérard de Sade put a different spin on the legend of Béranger Saunier. In his book, he wrote that the priest, during his renovation of the Church of St. Mary Magdalene, discovered 4 parchments in a pillar which supported the altar. De Sade included what purported to be photocopies of these parchments in his book. 2 of the parchments contained genealogies which stretched back to the days of the Frankish Merovingian dynasty. The other 2 contained passages from the Gospels written in Latin. According to de Sade, Saunier suspected that the parchments contained coded messages within their texts, and took them to Paris to have them deciphered. During his Parisian excursion, the French priest visited the Louvre Museum, where he purchased prints of 3 paintings, one of them Nicolas Poussin's The Shepherds of Arcadia. Upon his return to Rennes-le-Château, Saunier began spending an extraordinary amount of money on various building projects, having become inexplicably and spontaneously wealthy. De Sade implies in his book that Saunier, aided by the codes in the parchments, must have discovered some sort of treasure in Rennes-le-Château. During this time, locals observed that Saunier spent many a night in the church cemetery, engaged in some strange and mysterious business, moving tombstones and effacing epitaphs. One of the graves which the priest defaced was that of Marie de Blanchefort, a local aristocrat who died in 1781. Fortunately, the markings on de Blanchefort's grave had already been recorded in a booklet entitled Les Pierres Gravies du Languedoc, or The Engraved Stones in Languedoc, written by a man named Eugene Stublein in 1884. De Sède included photocopies of Stublein's interpretations of these markings, which included those inscribed on de Blanchefort's headstone, as well as words carved into a rectangular stone set perpendicular to it, in his book. In 1969, while vacationing in the Pyrenees, an English screenwriter named Henry Lincoln purchased a copy of de Sède's book. While examining a photocopy of one of the parchments Saunier is said to have discovered hidden in a pillar in his church, he noticed that some of the Latin letters were raised above the others. To his astonishment, Lincoln found that these anomalous letters, when put together, formed a message in French. When translated to English, the message reads, "To Dagobert II, King, and to Sion belong this treasure, and he is there dead." Fascinated, Lincoln believed that de Sède's story of Saunier and the mysterious treasure of Rennes-le-Château would make for an excellent BBC documentary. He said as much to a certain BBC producer, who agreed with him and sent him to Paris to interview Gerard de Sède. Ever since he deciphered the code in the parchment, Lincoln had suspected that the French author had discovered the secret message as well, and was curious as to why he failed to include the decipherment in his book. He said as much to de Sède in his interview, to which the author replied, "Because we thought it might interest someone like you to find it for yourself." De Sède's use of the word "we" troubled Lincoln, as it implied the presence of some shadowy association behind the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. As the BBC prepared their documentary on the tale of Béranger Saunier, Henry Lincoln received a letter from Gerard de Sède in which the French author disclosed the solution to the code in another of the parchments discovered in the Church of Mary Magdalene. When translated from French to English, the coded message reads, "Shepherdess no temptation, that Poussin Tenier holds the key. Peace 681, by the cross and this horse of God, I complete this daemon guardian at midday, blue apples." The words shepherdess and Poussin reminded Lincoln that, in de Sède's book, Saunier is said to have purchased a print of Nicolas Poussin's 1637 painting, The Shepherds of Arcadia. With this in mind, Lincoln looked at the various photocopies in de Sède's book and made an extraordinary discovery. One of the inscriptions on the tomb of Marie de Blanchefort is flanked by columns of letters, some from the Latin alphabet and others from the Greek alphabet. When the letters from the Greek alphabet are exchanged for their Latin counterparts, a Latin phrase emerges, "Et in Arcadia ego," another clear connection between Nicolas Poussin and the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. Around this time, Lincoln received another letter from Gerard de Sède. In the letter, the French author claimed that he and his shadowy associates, to which he alluded earlier, had discovered a tomb near Rennes-le-Château which bore remarkable resemblance to that depicted in Poussin's painting. Using the directions that de Sède provided, Lincoln found this tomb on the side of a road between the villages of Serres and Arc, just a few miles from Rennes-le-Château. Indeed, the tomb and its setting was nearly identical to that in Poussin's The Shepherds of Arcadia, down to the foliage in the background and a rock which rests at the base of the sarcophagus. Even more startling were the similarities between the surrounding landscape and the backdrop of Et in Arcadia ego. Lincoln quickly identified 4 mountaintops in Poussin's painting, which corresponded almost perfectly in both shape and placement with those surrounding this roadside sarcophagus. It seemed clear that Nicolas Poussin had painted this particular tomb and its surroundings in The Shepherds of Arcadia, either having visited the location or worked off detailed sketches. Henry Lincoln spent the next 7 years attempting to solve the mystery of Rennes-le-Château, assisted on occasion by tips he received from the author de Sède and his mysterious associates. Lincoln produced 3 films for the BBC which documented his progress. The Lost Treasure of Jerusalem, produced in 1971, The Priest, the Painter, and the Devil, produced in 1972, and The Shadow of the Templars, produced in 1979. In his second film, he consulted Professor Christopher Cornford of London's Royal College of Art. Cornford analyzed The Shepherds of Arcadia and determined that it appeared to be modeled around a portion of a pentagram. The professor attempted to explain the presence of this pentagram by suggesting that its inclusion implied Poussin's attempt to connect his painting with the occult, or with the cult of Pythagoras, an ancient Greco-Italian religion which revolved around geometry, mathematics, and classical Greek mythology. Corian Mall, who presented his own theory in this episode of The Curse of Oak Island, appears to have borrowed this part of Lincoln's work. Following the publication of The Shadow of the Templars in 1971, Henry Lincoln teamed up with New Zealander Michael Bagent and New Jerseyite Richard Lee, researchers who shared his interest in the Knights Templar. Together, the three men began to research the mystery of Rennes-le-Château. Shortly after the formation of this alliance, Lincoln was contacted again by Gerard de Sède, who directed him to a particular document in the Bibliothèque Nationale, the National Library of France. This document, called the Dossier Secret de Henri Lobineau, or the Secret Files of Henry Lobineau, contained, among other things, diagrams depicting the genealogy of the Merovingian dynasty, and references to an ancient secret society called the Priory of Sion. The Priory of Sion, the document contended, was formed in the year 1099 by descendants of the Merovingian dynasty. Following the First Crusade, it formed the Knights Templar as its military arm and financial branch. Over the years, it has been led by men of status and acclaim, including Leonardo da Vinci, Sir Isaac Newton, and Victor Hugo. Its motto is Et in Arcadia Ego, and its stated mission is the reinstallment of a Merovingian king on the throne of France. De Sède later confessed to Henry Lincoln that he was a member of the Priory of Sion, and that the organization's current Grand Master was a Frenchman named Pierre Plantard, who was the heir to the Merovingian dynasty. Using the Dossier Secret as one of their major sources, Lincoln, Bagent, and Lee wrote a book entitled The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which was published in 1982. The book revolves around an offensive thesis, which I will not dignify here with an exposition. One of the many propositions put forth in the book is that the phrase Et in Arcadia Ego could be considered an anagram for E, Tego Arcana Dei, Latin for Begone, I conceal the secrets of God. This proposal appears to have inspired Corian Mall's own interpretation of Et in Arcadia Ego as an anagram for Gite Neo Arcadia, or Excursion to New Arcadia. Due to its controversial nature, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail was commercially successful, prompting its three authors to pen a sequel to it entitled The Messianic Legacy. In 2003, American writer Dan Brown wrote an enormously successful mystery thriller novel entitled The Da Vinci Code, which appears to be based on the thesis outlined in The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. 3 years later, Brown's novel was adapted into a controversial Hollywood movie featuring actor Tom Hanks, bringing the mystery of Rennes-le-Château in a roundabout way to an international audience. For decades, a number of researchers, foremost among them French journalist Jean-Luc Chamet, have chipped away at the story of Rennes-le-Château and the Priory of Sion. Beneath a facade of mystery and intrigue, they have uncovered evidence of an extraordinarily complex hoax concocted by three men: the writer Gerard de Sède, the Priory of Sion's supposed Grand Master Pierre Plantard, and a French surrealist named Philippe de Chérisy. Plantard, the mastermind of the plot, conceived the story of the Priory of Sion, a medieval secret society with roots in the Merovingian dynasty, responsible for the formation of the Knights Templar, whose Grand Masters included the movers and shakers of European culture. A 50-year-old tomb near Rennes-le-Château, which bore remarkable resemblance to that depicted in Et in Arcadia Ego, prompted him to give Nicolas Poussin and his famous painting places of prominence in the story. Philippe de Chérisy then created evidence for the organization's existence by fabricating a number of historical documents, including the parchments which Saunier purportedly discovered in his church, the 1884 booklet of Languedoc engravings by Eugene Stublein, and the all-important Dossier Secret, which Plantard submitted to the Bibliothèque Nationale in 1967. Gerard de Sède completed the hoax by writing his book The Accursed Treasure of Rennes-le-Château, a colorful spin on a local legend, including photocopies of several of de Chérisy's forged documents therein, and waiting for someone like Henry Lincoln to stumble upon it and take the bait. Although the alleged connection between Nicolas Poussin and the Priory of Sion has been debunked, the unsolved Shugborough inscription and cryptic inscription on Poussin's tomb hint at the possibility that the French painter was privy to some sort of secret, clues to which he embedded in his paintings. Is it possible that this secret has something to do with the Oak Island mystery? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it in the future, please click the subscribe button below.